Okay. Okay. Very good afternoon, my dear friends. Welcome to today's session. So this is Dr. Padala Tirupati, Assistant Professor, Department of Botany, Government Degree College for Women, Jagityal. Today's our eminent resource person, Dr.K.RANI Madam Garu, Assistant Professor, Department of Botany, Government Degree College, Autonomous SIDDIPET. Madam is going to explain one of the important area in our plant embryology, that is pollination and fertilization. Regarding of this lecture, one more important note is that every CPGET, every PG entrance examination, you will get 2 to 3 questions from this class. So better you have to listen carefully, my dear friends. Madam, please start your session.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Okay, myself, Dr. Rani Komedi, working as a lecturer in Government Degree College, Autonomous SIDDIPET. Today we are going to discuss about that the fertilization or the pollination and fertilization in plants. So it's nothing but the types of pollination and pollen pistil interaction, fertilization. Okay, so generally pollination is, this is almost, you know, that this is the complete flower of the angiospermic plant, complete flower. So anther, filament, petal, calyx, sepal, pedicel, ovule, ovary, style, stigma, and these all are the parts of the flower. Generally, the pollination. What is pollination or the definition of pollination? Pollination is defined as the process of transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of the flower by different agents like wind, water, insects, and animals. So that is the pollination. The transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of a flower is called as pollination. In simple way, the transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of a flower. Okay, so the pollen grains are immobile. They cannot reach the stigma by themselves. Some external agent that is required for this process. So it can be wind, water, animal, gravity, or growth contacts. These all are the some different agents like wind, water, insects, and animals. These all are the pollen grain agents, transfer agents. So generally the pollen grains is a two-celled or three-celled stage. Okay, so the pollen grains for this purpose, for the first time, Camerarius. So Camerarius in 1694, Nana. Camerarius, he discovered that the reaching of pollen grains to the stigma, that is an important process in the formation of the seeds. So the complete pollination process is discovered by Camerarius in 1694. So he discovered that the reaching of pollen grains to the stigma, so it is very important. It is an important process in the formation of the seeds. Okay, so the pollination is of two types, Nana. First one is the self-pollination and second one is the cross-pollination. So the self-pollination means this is a complete flowchart of the pollination, self-pollination and cross-pollination. Self-pollination is divided into two ways. So autogamy and geitonogamy, and cross-pollination, that is abiotic factor, biotic factor. So in the abiotic factor, that is anemophily and hydrophily, biotic factors that by insects, by bats, by snakes, or by birds. Entomophily, chiropterophily, melacophily, and ornithophily. This is complete flowchart or the types of the pollination. Okay, what is self-pollination? So the self-pollination is it takes place when the pollen grains are transferred from the anther to the stigma of the same flower. Self means within the, okay, it is takes place, the pollen grains are transferred from the anther to the stigma of the same flower. Okay, so transfer of pollen grains from the anther of a flower to the stigma are either the same or genetically similar flowers. This is the self-pollination. Okay, so in the this process is also known as autogamy. Okay, accordingly, the self-pollination is of two types. In that, first is the autogamy and second one is the geitonogamy. Okay, so what is autogamy? Same, the pollen grains are transferred from the anther to the stigma of the same flower. So this process is also known as autogamy. It generally it can occur in plants having bisexual flowers. Almost the autogamy is occur in plants having the bisexual flowers. That means the anther and stigma both will presenting in the flower. So bisexual flowers, such flowers can undergo autogamy only. So if anther dehiscence and receptivity of stigma occurs at the same time, that generally the type of pollination that would take place depends on the type of flowers of the plants bear. That is the self pollination. And second one, so and another autogamy means it is a type of self pollination, as I told you, so in which an intersexual or perfect flower is pollinated by its own pollen. Okay, autogamy occurs by two methods. In that, first is the homogamy and second is the cleistogamy. So homogamy means the anthers and the stigmas of chasmogamous or the open flowers are brought together by growth, bending or folding. So that is the homogamous. Homogamy means the anthers and stigma of the chasmogamous or open flowers are brought together by growth, bending or folding. That is the homogamous pollination. And cleistogamy means in cleistogamous flowers, the anthers dies inside closed flowers. So inside the closed flowers, growth of this style brings the pollen grains in contact with the stigma. So that is the cleistogamous. So in this, the pollination and seed set are assured. The pollinators are not required for the cleistogamous. That is the homogamy and cleistogamy. Okay, so most of the angiosperms, they can bear the chasmogamous flowers. That means the flowers which have mature anthers and stigma. That is the chasmogamous flowers. They expose it to the pollinating agents either due to the opening of the flower or by the protrusion of the anthers and stigma from a closed flower to the outside environment. So that one. And the second type of flowers, cleistogamous flowers, they can found in angiosperms. They are almost the flowers which do not expose their organs to the pollinating agents. So the cleistogamous flowers, they do not expose their organs to the pollinating agents. So it may be inherent or it may be constitutional or ecological. So they will getting adapted to match severe environment conditions. So the cleistogamy is the best floral adaptation to promote the autogamy. Okay, the cleistogamy, so that is the best floral adaptation to promote the autogamy. And in that second one is the geitonogamy. So it is a type of pollination in which pollen grains of one flower are transferred to the stigma of another flower. Okay, geitonogamy means, so it is the pollination type. The pollen grains of one flower are transferred to the stigma of another flower belonging to either the same plant or genetically similar plant. So you can observe this diagrams also, pictures. Almost they will just to the transfer to the stigma of another flower belonging to either the same plant or genetically similar plant. So in geitonogamy, the flowers often show the modifications similar to ones found in the xenogamy or cross pollination also. Okay, so what is the advantages and disadvantages of the self-pollination? Almost the advantage of self-pollination, it maintains the parental characters or purity of the race indefinitely. And what is the disadvantage? So new useful characters are seldom introduced. And the self-pollination is used to maintain the pure lines for hybridization experiments. But in disadvantage purpose, so it vigor and vitality of the race decreases with prolonged self-pollination. So the plant does not need to produce large number of the pollen grains. This is some advantages purpose, and in disadvantages, immunity to diseases decreases. So in advantages, the flowers do not develop devices for attracting the insect pollinators. So as disadvantages purpose, the adaptability to changed the environment are reduced. So these almost 3 or 4 are the advantages and disadvantages of the self-pollination. And the second one is the cross-pollination. So in cross-pollination, almost cross-pollination takes place when the pollen grains are transferred from the anther of one flower to the stigma of another flower. So the different flowers, please keep observe the cross-pollination. It takes place when the pollen grains are transferred from the anther of the one flower to the stigma of the another flower. Okay, so generally in this the cross-pollination that is performed with the help of an external agency. Almost so some external agents are required for the cross-pollination. So cross-pollination, it is transfer of pollen grains from the anther of one flower to the stigma of a genetically different flower or another flower. So some agents like agencies of pollination, in that some abiotic agencies and biotic agencies. So in abiotic, anemophily and hydrophily. So these terms are very important in entrance point of view. Wind pollination, so it's referred as anemophily, water, so that is hydrophily. As per same biotic agencies like insects, so through insects, that is entomophily, through birds occur the pollination, that is ornithophily, through bats, so that is chiropterophily, and through snakes, that is melecophily, through ants, so that is myrmecophily, through snakes, that is the ophiophily. Okay, so almost in the cross-pollination, the plants may bear the unisexual flowers. So that means they separate the male and female flowers or male and female plants. So they will presence of only one male flower in one plant, and they can presence only one female flower in another plant. So these all are some unisexual flowers. Almost the plants, they may bear the unisexual flowers to favor the cross-pollination. So in these plants, the cross-pollination occurs by the some following adaptations, like dichogamy. That means it is a condition where the male and female sex organs, they will mature at different times. Okay, so the maturation of anthers, that means the maturation of anthers occurs much before the stigma. In some just like in protandrous plants, in protandrous flowers also. So that means impatiens and almost some different protandrous flowers, the maturation of anthers occurs much before the stigma. And almost in some plants, like maturation of stigma occurs much before the maturation of anthers. So that is also another cause. By the time the anther dehiscence, the stigma turns non-receptive. So this condition is called that protogyny. Protogynous condition, protandrous condition. Protandrous means only the male organs. So the anthers are maturity is before the stigma. So that is the protandry. Protogyny means almost stigma occurs much before the maturation of the anthers. So stigma is first maturation, that is protogyny. Anthers is the first maturity condition, that is the protandrous. So in these two conditions, the cross-pollination is occur. So that is dichogamy. And in almost in the heterostyle condition. So in heterostyle condition, the plants show the different types of flowers. They can depending on different lengths of styles and stamens. And also the pollination is effectively only when a flower pollinates a different type of flowers. They are also not its own type. So some examples like hercogamy and these all are coming in this way. Okay, so this is the almost in cross pollination. agencies of pollination, abiotic agents and biotic agents. So in the abiotic, in the first, anemophily. Anemophily is almost, you know that it is a mode of cross-pollination or transfer of pollen grains through the agency of wind. So for example, coconut, palm, date palm, maize, and almost poaceae family, many grasses, plants, cannabis, these all are through the pollination occurs through the anemophily. So what is the characteristics of the anemophily? So the flowers are colorless, odorless, and nectarless. And the pollen grains are light, small, and they can winged or unwettable. So, and another characteristics of the anemophilic pollination, the stigma is hairy, feathery, or branched to catch the wind, become windborne pollen grains. So as same, the pollen grains are produced in very large number. So pollen grains are very small and lightweight. So the pollen grains are produced in very large number also. It is the one cause to the anemophilic condition. And hydrophilic. So hydrophilic, almost it is the mode of pollination or transfer of pollen grains through the agency of water. For example, Juicera and Vallisneria. So Vallisneria, it is one type of the hydrophilic plant. So hydrophytic plant, that is Vallisneria and Juicera, both will comes under the hydrophilic pollination. So the characteristic flowers are very small and inconspicuous. So the nectar and odor are absent. Same, pollen grains are light and unwettable due to presence of the mucilage cover. So in this hydrophilic, the pollen grains are almost, they are presence of the mucilage cover. So the stigma is long, sticky, but unwettable. That is the hydrophilic. And as per same, entomophily. So in the entomophily, the pollen grains are transferred to a mature through the agency of insects like moths, butterflies, wasps, bees, beetles. So these all are the some agency of insects. So in this almost they are show the characteristics of entomophilic nature. They are showy or brighty colored. Most insects, they can pollinated flowers have a landing platform. So you can observe this flower, red color flower. The insects are just landing on that flower. Almost the flowers have the landing platform. And the pollen grains are spiny, heavy, and they are surrounded by a yellow oily sticky substances that is called the pollen kit. So the pollen kit also very important factor in the entomophilic pollination. So almost the stigmas are often inserted and sticky. Some flowers provide the safe place to insect for laying the eggs. So yucca, that is almost yucca gloriosa. These all are the look like they can provide the safe place to the insects for laying the eggs also. And ornithophily, so through birds, it is the mode of allogamy performed by birds. Okay, only a few types of birds are specialized for this purpose. They usually have small size and long beaks. So almost the beak is very long length. That is the special birds. So the ornithophilous flowers are usually brightly colored, almost red, orange, yellow, or blue. Okay, so the floral parts are commonly leathery. The ornithophilous flowers, they can secrete the abundant watery nectars or have the edible parts. So the scent is often absent in this ornithophilic nature. So methods to ensure the cross pollination, almost as I told you that, just I can repeat once again. Anthers and stigmas, they can mature at different times in a bisexual flower, so as to prevent the self-pollination. Okay, so the protonrous nature we'll discuss just now. Anthers mature earlier than the stigma of the same flower. So their pollen grains become available to stigma of the older flowers. So sunflower, salvia, these all are the protonrous flower. Just and protogyny. So the stigmas mature earlier so that they get pollinated before the anthers of the same flower. They will develop the pollen grains. So Mirabilis gelapa, 4 o'clock plant, and almost to Gloriosa and Plantago. These all are the protogynous plants. And hercogamy. So in some bisexual flowers, the structure of the male and female sex organs itself, they will provide a barrier to self-pollination. So in the self-sterility or self-incompatibility. So in this, the pollen grains of a flower do not germinate on the stigma of the same flower due to presence of similar self-sterile genes. Just S1, S2, S3, you can observe these 3 lengths. So in this, S1 and S3. S and S3 in pistil and S1 are S2 in pollen grains. So the tobacco, potato, cruciferous, these all are the just to look like a self-sterility plants, self-incompatibility plants. So that is the hercogamy in this way. And heterostyle. So in the heterogamy, and second one is the heterostylic nature. So there are 2 or 3 types of flowers with different heights of styles and stamens. Just to, we'll take only the length of the style and stigmas. So in the diheterostyle, that means dimorphic heterostyle, there are 2 types of flowers. In the almost pinnide, so the long style and short stamens. In this diagram, just you can observe in that pinnide means long style and short stamens. This is one type. So and thrumide, so in that short style and long stamens. So that is primula. Primrose or primula is the thrumide. In that the short style is very short, but stamens are very long. So the quite opposite for the pinnide and thrumide, that is the diheterostyle. So dimorphic heterostyle. And triheterostyle. So in this trimorphic heterostyle or tristyle, there are 3 types of flowers with different heights of the styles. So that is the lythrum. That means the pollination occurs between anthers and stigmas of the same height. They will be present in different flowers. Okay. So different flowers, but heights are same. That is the triheterostylic nature. Okay, 3 types of flowers with different heights of the styles is called as triheterostyle. It's very rare. Just to, that is, for example, best example of the triheterostyle is the lythrum. Okay, so and second one is the, this all is the self-pollination, cross-pollination and artificial pollination. So in the artificial pollination, this technique is used for the purpose of hybridization. So it involves the pollination of desired female parents with pollen from the desired male parent. Okay, so artificial pollination, it's look like a just to hybridization technique, Nana. It involves the pollination of desired female parents with pollen from the desired male parents. So they taking all precautions to prevent the contamination of stigma with undesired pollen. So almost it will, in unisexual plants, the procedure is simple, but it's complicated in bisexual ones. Okay, 2 processes that takes place in bisexual flowers. In that, first is the emasculation and second one is the bagging nature, bagging. So emasculation means just we will cover only which we will want that to style or stigma, that will cover with covers, that is the other, and bagging also same technique. The 2 process that takes place in the bisexual flowers. Just wait. Okay, so and importance of the cross pollination. What is the importance of cross pollination? So the cross pollination, it will be introduced genetic recombinations and hence the variations in the progeny also. So that is the advantage. But in the disadvantage purpose, a factor of chance is always involved in cross pollination. But in advantages, the cross-pollination increases the adaptability of the offspring towards changes in the environment. But as same is some undesirable characters, it may create the race also. In the advantage purpose, it makes the organisms better titled in the struggle for existence. So in disadvantages, the very good characters of the race, they are likely to be spoiled. So same the plants they can produce through cross-pollination are more resistant to desirable. So this is the types of the pollination. So in that self-pollination, cross-pollination, and almost the artificial pollination. And another way, so in this, so in pollen pistil interaction, a series of processes, so they can occur from the time the pollen grains lands on the stigma, that means pollination, to the time the sperm cell reaches the egg. So these series of processes collectively form the pollen pistil interaction. So this is also refer the programmatic phase. So this includes the almost the recognition of the pollen by the stigma, the pollen germination and entry of pollen tube into the stigma, style and the ovule, and the pollen attachment. So just like I will show, this is the steps in pollination and fertilization of the flowering plant. So in this, almost this is also known as pollen pistil interaction, Nana. That means a series of processes occur from the time the pollen grains lands on the stigma to the time so the sperm cell reaches the egg. So these all are these series of process. It is called the pollen pistil interaction. So in this, first it include the minimum 5 or 6 steps. In that first one is the recognition of the pollen by the stigma, and second one pollen germination and entry of pollen tube into the stigma, style and ovule, and next is the pollen attachment and hydration, and next one is the pollen germination and tube growth, and next path of the pollen tube into the style and ovule. So almost to understand these events in a better way, so just we know the structure of the pistil has been just we will discuss what is the structure of the pistil. Or the pistil is the female constituent of the flower. So it consisting of 3 parts, namely stigma, style and ovary. First we will discuss the complete angiospermic flower. So in that, almost pistil is the female part, female constituent of the flower. So it consists the 3 parts, stigma, style and ovary. So its structure helps in receiving the pollen grains, helping it in its germination. So followed by entry of the pollen tube into the ovary, so ovule and ultimately into the embryo sac, resulting in the fertilization. So the various parts of the pistil, that means almost stigma, style and ovary. We know that just to when we will coming into the fertilization process, just double fertilization and triple fusion. So this is almost, you know, that the 2 sperms integuments almost we will discuss in last classes the structure of the ovule and what is the ovary. So that is 7-celled and 8 nucleus state of the structure embryo, that is called ovary. Just you can observe this is complete the ovule, pollen tube. So 2 sperms are come from that. So one will attach to the egg cell and another one is the come to the almost the center part of the 2x state of the egg cell. So just we'll discuss that. Just we'll come back. So this is the fertilization, Nana. This is the fertilization. So the fusion of the male gametes, just you can observe 2 sperms are there. The fusion of male gamete with the female gamete is called that fertilization. Okay. So the phenomenon of fertilization was first reported and found by Edward Strasburger in 1894. It's very, very, very important in entrance point of view. Okay. So the fertilization process is first reported by Edward Strasburger in 1894. So in this, the male gametes are brought to the egg by a pollen tube. The phenomenon is known as siphonogamy. Okay. So in this, the fertilization occurs in 4 main stages. In the germination of pollen tube on stigma, as I told you. So the growth of the pollen tube and pollen tube entry into the embryo sac, the fusion of the gametes. So just in this diagram, you can observe all these pollination and fertilization of a flower. So almost one in the first meiosis, just 2 cells. After second meiosis, 2 cells convert the 4 cells. So and third mitosis, so the almost 8-celled stage. So nuclear migration and cell wall formation. 3 cells is the antipodal cells. 2 is the synergids, 1 egg cell, and 2 is the center part polar nuclei also there. This is the complete embryo. So in this embryo, almost the pollen tube always enter the embryo sac at the micropylar end. So inside the embryo sac on male gametes, they fuses with the egg to form the diploid zygote. So this process is known as syngamy. Almost just you can observe here in these 2 sperm cells, 2 are come from the pollen tube. So one will attach to the center part. Just in this. Okay. So the pollen tube always enter the embryo sac at the micropylar end. So inside the embryo sac on the male gamete, they both will fuse the egg to form the diploid zygote. So that is syngamy. And same the other male gamete. So second male gamete fuses with the secondary nucleus. The polar nuclei also there in the center part to form the triploid primary endosperm nucleus. So this process is known as triple fusion. First one male gamete is fused with the egg cell. That is the first fertilization. That is the syngamy. And second male gamete fused with the polar nuclei or secondary nucleus to form the triploid primary endosperm. So PEN, primary endosperm, that is